everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and in this bonus DOM Masterclass video, what we're going to do is try to create a web component base class that has the basic features of React. I've done this in several libraries. You can head over to alexmercedcoder.com and check out my libraries, where I have several libraries that actually have all this built in for you to make web components. But I figured, let me show you some of how that is done, so you can. It's a good thing to know. So we're going to create a new base class. We'll call the class component. Component. Oh, my bird just flew in my head. Okay, class component extends HTML element. So let's just kind of first construct the base class. So, and then we need to define the constructor. And the constructor needs to invoke the super. Okay, and just as a test, we'll create a test component. So class test, call it test extends component. Okay, and then that's also going to need to call the constructor. For that. Okay. And then we want to make this an element, define, or custom elements dot define. Test will be the HTML tag. And it'll use the test base class. So let's go back to our HTML here. I'll wipe out all the stuff from the previous video. And let's make test. Cool, there's test. And let's just add some props. Cheese equals hello. And something equals bread. Cool. So now let's run this in the browser. Let's open up the terminal so that we can catch any errors that might be running. Okay, that's fine. Right now it's just the favicon error. That's fine with me. Okay, now what we want to do is we'll try to make it more like a React class component. So if you ever done React classes, basically what happens is that you have to write what's called a render function. Okay. So you write this render function, and it will, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in state and props to it. It's going to be slightly different just because I like this a little bit better. Okay, state and props. And actually, I'm going to want the pass the actual component to itself. You'll see why. And I'm going to eventually, what I want to do is I want to return. Right now, we're just going to return h1 hello world. So my component eventually will just render this hello world, but again, I have to define the parent in the parent class. I got to define the logic that's going to make that happen. Okay. So right now, let's define render in the parent class. So it's just going to be an empty function. Okay. On top of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function called build. Okay, and in the constructor, we're going to add the shadow root. So this dot attach shadow. Mode open. Okay. So what's going to happen is that whenever this build function runs, it's going to say this dot shadow root dot inner HTML equals the result of render. So this dot render. Okay. And we'll come back to that in a second. Which should work at the moment. Let me just think about that. This dot shadow root. And then we actually want to run the build function once in the constructor. And see, now we see the hello world. Because basically what happens is that when the parent constructor is run, the build function runs, which takes on render, and then the return value of render should be a template string. Okay, cool. So far, so good. Okay, next thing we're going to want to do is I want there to be console.log state props element. I want to make sure that these things exist. Right now they're just undefined, as we see. Okay. Now we're just going to say that this dot render will be passed, or build will be passed this dot state, this dot props, and this. Okay, so we can see at least the last one is defined the actual element itself. We still need to create state and props. Now state will be defined by, in the class, because state has to be defined by whoever's creating the component. So we'll come back to that. But I wanted to create props, so that way props just kind of works out of the gate. So let's see here. This dot props, let's just start step by step. This dot props equals this dot attributes. Let's see what we get. Let me refresh. This dot props equals this dot attributes. Really saying this doesn't have any attributes? That should not be correct. Get attribute. Well, I could get attribute. I would only get one. Let's just try that out. That still doesn't quite work. Why is that? This dot state, this dot props. And we're saying that this dot props equals get attribute. And in my index.html, it does have a property called cheese. So why aren't we grabbing it? We're receiving props from this dot props, which should be this props element. Okay, let me just see if I try to just call this even just cheese. Okay, so then it still doesn't work, so that means there's something else that's going on here. This dot props. Let's try this. This dot props equals this dot get attribute cheese, and then let's console log. Okay, so that time it works. So now let's change this to attributes. Okay, good. Now we got the named node map, so which gives me this. Now the problem is I want a proper object. So I want the local name, and I want the node value. So node name, node value. That's what I want. Okay. So I'm going to use map dot. No, I don't think I can map over this. Got to turn it into an array first. So let's do that. Okay, good. Now this is an array. We're getting there. And again, in there we have the two nodes, which have node value and node name. So now I can map over this. Dot map. Okay, and dot map. It's going to be a node And then what I want to return, I want to return Let me think about that. That's not actually what I want to do. What I want to do is actually, we're going to create a method. Get props. Okay. And we're going to say this dot props. Well, first let's do this. We'll call this adder. So const attributes equals this dot attributes. So that gives me the array. And then I want to create const props, which is going to equal an empty object. And then I want to loop over adder, all the attributes. I've done this in an easier way before, but it's not coming to me at the moment. For each node, and for each node, I want to do a props node.node name, and I want that to equal node.node value. So that should add each item to the props. Okay, and then basically this dot props should equal props after that function is run. Cool. And so every time we do a build, we will run the get props function to update props. Cool. And there you go. See, there's a proper props object, right? Nice. So I passed an attribute called cheese. There's cheese, there's something, and I can add as many properties as I want. Very nice. That's the way I want it. Okay, cool. So now I can start actually like using props in the subcomponent. So again, this is the base class. So the idea here is like you do this logic once, and then you can build as many components using that base class, like so. Okay, so basically, but I got props working. So essentially what's going to happen is, let's do this. Let's alter this a little bit. Use backticks. H1. And let's interpolate our props here. Props dot bread and props dot cheese. I'm able to do that because I made props a parameter instead of just making it something that kind of exists. Like if you ever use React class components, you have to do like this dot props. But by saying, hey, it's something I have to define in the render functions argue parameters, I can now just do props.bread, props.cheese, or I could even destructure it. Okay, cool. So that's working. Oh, undefined hello. Oh, because the other one's called something. Props.something. There we go. Bread hello. Nice. Okay. So now we want state. So let me think about how we want to define state. Should it be done in the constructor? No. I guess the best way to define state is just you just define state. This dot state equals, and then it'll equal whatever object we decide. So we're going to say, hey, cheese equals Gouda. So that we have cheese, and that's going to be a string. So cheese equals Gouda. And what we want to do is we want to have a function called setState to be like React, and which takes in a new state. Okay. So you pass in an object that equals the new state, and essentially what this is going to do is that this dot state is going to equal a new object that is a mix of the state you passed in. Actually, that's first the existing state and the state you passed in. And then when you update the state, right afterwards, it'll run this dot build again, updating the build. Okay, cool. Okay. Refresh this. So right now we're getting undefined. Oh, because the parent constructor is running first. So we should do this. Let me think about that. So then I went. Then we do want to pass state to the constructor here. Reason being is I want state to exist before the first build. So instead I'd rather set that in the parent constructor. So that way I can do this. And say, or I could just put it in the constructor and it's just like this dot build. No, this dot state equals so in this case the constructor will have to take an argument state. So then this dot build will take in the state, pass that into build. We'll just set the state to, or actually, why am I even bothering to put that in there? Just do this. This dot state equals state. Okay, so good. So now it's receiving the state. I can see the state there. Nice. And I have set state, so that way if I were to update the state, it would cheese. So like now let's use the state. So let's add another thing here. State dot cheese. See if that works. Yep, good. That's Gouda from state. Okay, and basically let's make it where if I click on a button, hello. Okay, so there's a button that says hello. I want to make it that if I click on that button, that I want to make it that if I click on that button, that I can add an event listener. So let me think about how I want to pull that one off. Okay. What I want to do is probably create a post render function. Post render. We'll keep it empty for now, but we'll make it where that after each build, after it updates the HTML, then it's going to run this dot post render. Okay, which will receive the state, props, and this. Again, should be this dot state and this dot props. Okay, so this way I can define a post render function, which is going to receive state props this. Let me just make sure I did that in the right order. This dot state, this dot props this. Okay, good. And what I want basically after each render, I wanted to say this. Well, let's get the button. Const button equals this dot shadow root dot query selector. Grab the button. And then when I grab the button, I want to add an event listener to the button. Button dot add event listener, so that way when you click on it, what it will do is run a function that will use this dot set state and pass in a new state where cheese will now equal Munster. So we pass in the new state. Cool. Okay, so again, the idea here is that with this base class, then I can just continue writing classes like this, and writing additional components becomes a lot less. But let's see here. I'm having an error on line 47. This, oh, I see. This should be element, because it's the parameter. Good. Now let's see here. If I click on this, it should turn the Munster. And it turns the Munster. Okay, I've created a stateful component base class. Okay, not the first time I've done it, but now you can kind of see the steps that I took to do it, and maybe you optimize it, you add extra features. But theoretically, I've just recreated React class components in a sense. You know, basically you have state, you have props. Props doesn't work exactly the way, because again, here you can only pass strings. But, you know, it's pretty close. It's pretty close, and you're not unloading a whole framework, etc. So again, the idea here is that this base class, which goes all the way to here, this base class gets built once, and then any additional components that I want in my application, I just create using this extending the component base class. Okay, and now so things like set state are already built in, the logic for render is already built in, props is already built in. I just have to worry about defining sort of the component logic instead. So yeah, I thought that'd be pretty cool. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching that. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. If you liked the video, hit like, hit subscribe, head over to devnursery.com and sign up for the Discord and Slack communities, and I'll see you around. Ciao.